Fingerboarding is undoubtedly one of the most specific exercises you can do for climbing, but there's so much information out there. Where do you start? So today we're back to the fundamental series and we're giving you all the tools you need to take your finger strength to the next level. Ollie's come in today because Ollie has been testing fingers for the last 10 years and he knows a thing or two about fingerboarding. So Ollie, talk us through fingerboarding.
So yeah, I've been lucky enough to be working with some of the best athletes over the last 10 years. That's in the UK and abroad. And by testing so many athletes, you get to see all the little nuances in fingerboarding and finger strength, down to finger size and what they actually do when they're gripping the holds. So I'll go through a load of basics and then we'll explain the differences. So edge depth, so that is the depth of the edge or the hold that you're going to be training on. Here at Lattice we use a 20mm edge a lot of the time, and that's because we use it in testing and training. The reason why we chose that depth is it on average covers 1 finger pad depth, so that's where you get this first crease in your finger. We find it applies itself really well to indoor climbing and outdoor climbing and a lot of the different grip position types. If you're trying to use a smaller edge and we're like going outside and using really small crimps, you can train on the smaller edges, so micro edges, but you want to try and bring this in later into your training and when you're more experienced. Using a larger edge depth like a 20mm edge is actually pretty applicable all around and will still train you for those smaller edges. Using something bigger is good to get stronger forearms, but it's not going to apply itself to the climbing wall quite as well. So joint angle, we're talking about pretty much how your fingers look when they're holding a fingerboard. We often say that half crimp is king, and the reason for that is it uses a lot less friction and it puts your joints and your forearm muscles in sort of the worst biomechanical position, which means you have to be a lot stronger to hold those grip positions. However, as you're beginning your fingerboard journey, you can use different grip positions, so slightly more open or slightly more closed without a thumb wrap, so not in full crimp. The main thing is when you're doing this type of training is look around you at what everyone else is doing, and there'll be a lot of variety in the looks of people's hands when they're fingerboarding. So you need to work out what's comfortable for you and try and work out what makes the biggest strength gains towards your goals. If you're going to go pocket climbing, then you need to start using pockets in your fingerboard training. If you're going to be using really small edges, like we said before, then you need to start building that into your strength training as well. So how many fingers should you use when you're fingerboarding? Well, the easy answer is most of the time you're going to be using 4 fingers. Like I said, 20mm edge, half crimp gets you a long way in climbing. So 4 fingers in that position is a great start. As I said previously, if you've got any specific goals, such as using pockets, you do want to start opening the hand up, and it's almost a learning effect of getting used to those grip positions. If you go from just using a 4-finger half crimp, you can get quite a tight hand, and then when you try and use a pocket, it'll feel quite uncomfortable. It's like doing a new movement or technique. So try and build that in as a bit of a practice. If you don't need to use that, or you're not aiming to get better at those positions, then you can just use a general variety, starting off with that 4-finger grip position. So how long should we actually hang for? Well, there's a massive variety in the types of sessions you can do out there, but usually we're looking at dead hanging or max hanging, so just hanging from the board for around 5 seconds to 30 seconds on each hang. The variety in there comes from the intensity that you're using and what you're actually aiming to achieve. So generally, the shorter hangs are going to be a much higher intensity because you're going to be reaching failure or close to failure at a much shorter duration. Whilst the endurance of a longer hang, so going up to around 30 seconds, means the intensity will be a bit lower. Generally, we say it's really good to vary this throughout the year so you get multiple stimulus. But if you're looking for a bit of a gold standard again, around 10 seconds is a really good place to start. So should you hang on 1 arm or 2 arms? So generally I'm just going to say 2 arms is pretty much good for most of the athletes that I've worked with over the years, and this is really high level athletes as well. The reason why you change to 1 arm is you work into something very specific, or you're finding the amount of weight that you're adding to your body, so additional weight, to hang on 2 arms is becoming really uncomfortable. Generally, I would never give anyone 1 arm fingerboarding unless they're able to hang on 2 arms with 150% body weight. So for example, if I weighed 70 kilos, then that'd be an additional 35 kilos or more that I need to hang on 2 arms in order to start thinking about 1-arm training. If you are reaching that level, then you still need to consider, am I improving with the protocol I've got already? If you are, then don't play with it. You're already doing a good job. So hanging position is something that is quite important. And the main thing that we can take away is just don't be lazy with your shoulders. So what you're looking for is you can have straight arms or a slight bent arm as long as they're not too bent, and that's a good position for the elbow. And for your shoulders, what you're looking for is for them to be engaged, but not working extremely hard and not fully relaxed. So what that looks like is if you hang on a bar, really, really low, fully relaxed, and you'll see your shoulders go up near your ears, and then you engage as high as possible. So you're trying to create the biggest gap possible between your ears and your shoulders. And then you sink back down to somewhere in the middle. That's usually a good place to start. Have a quick go by filming yourself on your phone and you'll find that position pretty comfortable. The other thing to keep a really good form is try and keep your abs and your bum relatively contracted. So keeping those bums and tums tight. And that just means that your body stays straight and you're not doing all the work from your lower back. So we're going to start with a max hang training protocol. So just to clarify, that doesn't mean max hang as in you're going to fail on each rep or each set. It means it's maximum strength training, so it'll be really high intensity. You can use a simple 10-second hang protocol, so hanging on the fingerboard for 10 seconds, and I'd recommend a 4-finger half crimp position on a 20mm edge, like I said earlier. I've worked with loads of clients over the years that have got to a really, really high standard in climbing just using this training protocol. So if you start using it and you're still seeing gains week on week and month on month, then keep it up and it can take you a long way. What we're going to do is 10 seconds of hanging in that position with shoulders engaged. Then you're going to rest for around 2 to 3 minutes between each set. That's going to make sure that you have sufficient recovery between each hang. A lot of people ask us, why don't you rest for a lot longer? Well, you can rest for a bit longer than that to make sure that you're feeling ready for the next hang, and that's totally fine. If you feel you need a bit of extra time, then just put pause on the timer and you can make sure that you rest until you're ready to go again. We generally use that 2 to 3 minutes because it means the training session doesn't go on for too long and it keeps the training into a concise time period. So what intensity should you use? You're looking for around 80 to 90% of your maximum effort. You can find this out by doing 100% maximum testing. So doing a testing protocol at the beginning of a training cycle. And I wouldn't recommend doing that more than once every month or every couple of months. If you don't want to do any testing or you want to adapt it within the training cycle, you can base it on effort level. 10 being an absolute maximum to stay on the fingerboard and you're trying your absolute best to keep good form. You want to use around 8 to 9 out of 10 in that effort level scale, which means you're walking away having kept good form and there's a little bit left in the tank. So one thing that a lot of people miss with max hang strength training is not recording the loads you're being used and trying to increase it really slowly week on week or month on month. You will have points of plateau and that's absolutely fine, but just look at really, really small increments. Too many people start a training protocol and try to ramp up the weight really quickly and then hit this plateau, and it becomes a little bit too stressful for the fingers as you're doing other training. So what I'd really recommend is start lower than you want and build up really slowly week on week, and that'll keep the consistent gains coming for much longer. So for the max hang protocol, you're going to be looking at around 6 sets of max hangs, and that doesn't include your warm-up. So you're going to build up really slowly, and I do mean slowly, over around 4 to 6 sets, starting at a really low weight after you've already done a general warm-up. Then you're going to hit that 6 sets of doing the intensity that you really want to do, which is the high load. If you find that you're starting to fatigue too much throughout the session, it's absolutely fine to do less sets than that or drop the weight slightly. The next protocol we're going to look at is repeaters. So unlike max hangs where you're going to do one hang and have a long rest, this time we're going to do multiple hangs with tiny rests in between and then have a long set rest after that. So what that'll look like in this protocol is 7 seconds of hanging, 3 seconds of rest, so that gives you enough time to put your hands down, maybe a quick shake and a chalk, and then hanging back for 7 seconds. You're going to repeat this for 1 minute, so that's 6 times, hang, rest, hang, rest. Then you're going to have a long rest period after that of around 3 minutes again. This protocol is really good for increasing your strength capacity, so it's still high intensity, but because you've got to extend that hanging period on and off, you've got to be able to sustain that for the whole minute. The intensity you'll use for this session will vary massively from person to person. If you're basing the intensity or the load being used on that max hang testing session done at the beginning of the training cycle, you'll probably end up using somewhere between 60 to 80% of that maximum load. However, because the intensity of this workout varies massively from person to person, I'd personally recommend basing this on real world practice. So that means have a go at the session and record the load being used. Like before, each set you should finish with a little bit left in the tank so that you're not failing, but you are trying really, really hard. Record the load being used and adapt that depending on how you found each set.
Okay, so you've got two really fundamental fingerboarding sessions, but when do these fit into our training? So the first thing is timing around our fingerboard sessions. A big mistake we often see is people always doing their fingerboarding after a massive climbing session when they're really fatigued. But remember, for a lot of these, especially those max hangs, the intent is building maximum strength. So you don't want to do this in a fatigued state. This gives a really defined reason for why we will place sessions like max hangs before a climbing session, so they can be done at really high quality. Of course, there's a caveat to this. If you're not familiar with these training sessions, or you're doing quite high volume, then you don't want to do it before a climbing session, which is also going to include high intensity climbing. For things like repeater sessions or long duration hangs, these can be placed after a high intensity climbing session because the intensity is lower and the intent of them is often for building strength endurance or endurance itself. If the fingerboard session is relatively new to you, then I would actually suggest doing these in isolation, not with your climbing sessions, just so that you give time to break them in, get familiar with them, and really allow for good recovery. How often should we fingerboard? Well, this is a bit of a it depends answer. Generally, if it's a new session, once a week is going to be sufficient. You can also do fingerboarding more than once a week, twice, maybe even 3 times a week, but it depends on the style of fingerboarding. You might do 1 session of max hangs and 1 session of repeaters, and this could be enough. If you've been fingerboarding for a long time, or perhaps in the past few years through lockdowns, we've been stuck at home, many people have been fingerboarding at least 3 or 4 times a week because they're not doing the amount of climbing. Just consider how much training you're doing on your fingers in the climbing wall, and then how much supplemental work you can do on a fingerboard. Remember, fingerboarding doesn't replace climbing, and fingerboard sessions should always be relatively short because of how focused and isolated they are on the fingers. If you're watching this video and you've never fingerboarded before, a big question you might have is, when do I start fingerboarding? There is no perfect time to start or no defined point in your climbing when fingerboarding is most appropriate. A general rule is that you want to spend the first months and perhaps even years of your climbing spending most of your time building your skill development, and you're going to gain a lot of your finger strength simply from your climbing. If you have a good foundation in your climbing and think that fingerboarding would be a good supplemental exercise to you, a really good place to start is with longer duration hangs at that slightly lower intensity, somewhere around 15 to 20 seconds, or that repeater session. This will help develop the structures of the fingers and forearms and help build a really solid foundation for higher intensity training that will come later on. If you're unsure, you should always talk to a coach because every case is different. This has been our fingerboarding fundamentals. If you learned something new or enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.